The story of Ruth is a remarkable tale of how a widow, Naomi, her Moabite daughter-in-law Ruth, and a wealthy farmer from Bethlehem, Boaz, ultimately lead to the birth of Obed, the grandfather of King David, one of Israel's greatest kings. It begins during a time when Israel was struck by a severe famine. A man named Elimelech, along with his wife Naomi, and their two sons Mahlon and Chilion, left their home in Bethlehem and moved to the foreign land of Moab. Sadly, Elimelech died there, and later, his two sons married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. After about 10 years, both sons also died, leaving Naomi in Moab with her two widowed daughters-in-law. Now alone and grieving the loss of her husband and sons, Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem. Initially, both Orpah and Ruth wished to accompany her, but Naomi urged them to return to their own homeland, explaining that she could not provide for them or offer them new husbands. Tearfully, Orpah agreed to stay behind, but Ruth's devotion to Naomi shone brightly. She famously declared, "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God my God." Together, Ruth and Naomi journeyed back to Bethlehem. Upon their arrival, Naomi and Ruth, both widows, faced financial hardships. In ancient Israel, farmers were instructed to leave behind gleanings, sheaves of grain that fell during harvest, for the poor. Ruth, determined to provide for herself and Naomi, went to glean in the fields. By chance, Ruth found herself working in the field of Boaz, a distant relative of Naomi. Boaz soon noticed Ruth and inquired about her. When he learned of her loyalty to Naomi, he ensured her comfort, even inviting her to share a meal and instructing his workers to leave extra grain for her to collect. By the end of the day, Ruth had gathered an abundance of grain and continued to glean in Boaz's fields throughout the harvest season. As time passed, Naomi became concerned about Ruth's future and believed it was time for her to remarry. In ancient Israel, an unmarried woman often had little financial security. According to custom, a childless widow could marry a close relative of her late husband who would raise up seed for him. Given Boaz's kindness towards Ruth, Naomi believed he was the best candidate for this role. Naomi devised a plan. She told Ruth to dress well and visit Boaz at the threshing floor during the night, where he would likely be celebrating the end of the harvest. Ruth followed the plan, lying down next to Boaz and uncovering his feet, a symbolic gesture of asking for protection. When Boaz awoke and realized it was Ruth, he was both surprised and pleased. Ruth asked him to be her redeeming kinsman, to which Boaz agreed. However, he mentioned that a closer relative had the first right to redeem Ruth, but if that man declined, Boaz would gladly take on the responsibility. Before sending Ruth home, Boaz gave her even more grain. The next day, Boaz met with the closer relative at the city gate, where legal matters were often settled. Cleverly, he persuaded the man to relinquish his right to Naomi's property and Ruth. The man did so by removing his sandal in front of witnesses, signifying that he had given up his claim. With this, Boaz was free to marry Ruth. Boaz soon claimed Ruth as his wife, declaring that their children would carry on the name of Ruth's late husband. Ruth conceived and gave birth to Obed, who became the father of Jesse, and ultimately the grandfather of King David, the greatest king of Israel and the forefather of the Messiah. Remarkably, Israel's most revered king and the Messiah to come would descend from Ruth, a Moabite woman from a nation often in conflict with Israel. Ruth's loyalty, however, stood out as a beacon of faithfulness. Ruth's story is one of redemption against all odds. Despite her difficult circumstances, Ruth trusted in God's provision. She believed that God was all she needed, and in that faith, God performed a miraculous work. He took a poor, hurting outcast and provided for her, bringing her great love and security through Boaz. The story of Ruth reminds us that redemption is possible for anyone, no matter where they come from or what trials they've faced. God's plan for each of us is far greater than we can imagine, and just as He redeemed Ruth, He can bring restoration and hope into our lives.